I want to begin with former counsel to Assistant Attorney General for National Security, Jamil Jaffer, former Democratic Congressman Tom Malinowski, who served as Senior Director on the National Security Council under President Clinton, and former spokesperson for Senator Ted Cruz's presidential campaign, Rick Tyler. Glad to have all of you guys here this evening. There's so much to cover. I'll begin with you, Rick, because the president has said that his goal for Pulte is to act as kind of a disruptor. What is your expectation for what that would mean and how this might play out?
Nobody knows.
Does that concern you?
Yeah, because the office of the ODNI maybe need to be reformed. I don't know enough to know what needs to be reformed. Is it too big? Probably too big, but this isn't serious reform. You can tell by what the president, because he always gives himself away, he said is about elections. By the way, the DNA is in charge of foreign intelligence services, which aren't supposed to be looking at domestic, only foreign interference. So that's one. And two, cut what for what? I mean, reform is fine, but tell us what the reform is for. What's wrong? What's broken? And does this guy have any experience to actually reform it? And apparently he doesn't. Also, he has a record. His record is to be a hatchet man for Trump and to exact revenge. And I'm very concerned when someone is unshackled with national security intelligence secrets. That doesn't sound like a good reform plan to me.
I mean, I'm struck especially, Congressman, by the idea the president sees the acting status as a major benefit to him, that he might have more power. Now, one could read that to think that means he has no oversight and could do what he wants. I mean, that's certainly very powerful, but that's not the interest of the American people.
Yeah, it just means he doesn't answer to anyone but one man. He doesn't answer to Congress. He doesn't have to report or get confirmed. And you know, I really pity anyone who has to defend this today. You mentioned he has no security clearance. That means he has never in his life seen a classified document. He has never in his life been briefed on a classified matter by anyone in the U.S. government. He has no idea how they do their job. Sorry, I'm thinking about the NBA Finals tonight and my beloved Knicks. It would be as if my team hired a basketball coach who has never stepped on a basketball court. The fans would go crazy. So it shows utter disrespect for the work that these professionals do to keep us safe from terrorism and from our nation's enemies around the world, which is the job.
This is your wheelhouse in so many ways in terms of thinking about this, Jamil, because the federal statute for DNI, I mean, this is not like a preference. The statute actually says that the nominee shall have extensive national security expertise. Now, one way I suppose you could try to get around this is suggest, well, it doesn't actually talk about somebody in an acting position. That's the confirmation process, the vetting. But I mean, the substance of what is actually required and what they want to have, given the timing of when this is enacted, is quite obvious.
No, that's exactly right. I mean, look, the president knows why he put Bill Pulte in place, right? He knows why he's put him there in this temporary acting capacity. He knows why he's not nominating him, right?
It's for the permanent position.
Right, for the permanent position. It's clear. And so the question then is, what is he doing there? Look, the reality is the DNI's office probably does need reform, right? It does need to be slimmed down. You know, Tulsi Gabbard is trying to cut it down. She had ODNI 2.0, was going to cut it by 40%. Senator Cotton has talked about cutting it down to 650 FTE. You know, ODNI has gotten bloated. There's little doubt about that. There's a lot of people, former DNI Mike McConnell will tell you that, right? So the question then just becomes, okay, if ODNI needs to be slimmed down, who's the right person to do it? What's the right way to do it?
Or the timing.
Or the timing, and you need congressional buy-in, and what role do they play? But it's not like we didn't know what are the president is on these things. It's not like we didn't know the kind of president we were getting. He's going to move swiftly. He's going to move with executive action. And if Congress lets them get away with it, he'll keep putting acting people in place, keep them there as long as possible. And so maybe that means the Federal Vacancies Reform Act needs to be modified. I mean, look, Congress has a role to play here. They can put pressure on the president in a variety of ways. You saw some Republican senators there talk about Bill Pulte's his qualifications. But the question then is, they have other tools as well. They can use oversight hearings of other parts of the government. They can use their budgetary authority. If the legislative branch wants to do its job, it can. The problem is Congress has been asleep at the switch for the last year and a half. If they want to be influential, they can.
But what is to stop him from doing this for those very reasons and run around the confirmation process continuously, other cabinet positions, frankly?
Yeah, and there's some serious damage. I mean, the guy's an idiot and he's incompetent. So there's some things I'm not worried about. But here are a couple of consequences. Number one, our foreign intelligence partners, while this guy is acting, are they going to be trusting the U.S. intelligence community with the intelligence that they need to share so that we can be safe? I'm not so sure. Number two.
Yeah, by the way, on that point, there's
Yeah.
already concerns about the trust relationship between the United States and other of our
Already,
allies.
yes. Now we have a CIA that's still under professional leadership, but this will hurt. Number two, Congress right now is debating the reauthorization of what's known as Section 702, the authority that allows the intelligence community to look at, under hopefully good safeguards, information that's incidentally collected about Americans. I might have voted for that as a member of Congress, as a Democrat with the proper safeguards. No way would I vote for it while this guy is in charge of that process. To give this guy the ability to spy on Americans?
Which is why it recently failed, because this is a position of public trust. This is the most senior person who informs the president about intelligence decisions around the world. All the things that look, a Supreme Court justice, I think by law and by Constitution, could be a child from Zimbabwe. I'm not picking on Zimbabwe, but I don't think anybody had in mind that a Supreme Court justice should be that. That it should be, and here you have the law spelled out. This is not a series, and this is an end run around what the intention of the law is supposed to be. Does it fit with Trump? Absolutely, we can go down the list. But this is too dangerous. National security is a very, it keeps us safe, and it should keep us safe.
You know, everyone has been stopping at the idea of what the qualifications are under that code of the 50 U.S. Code 3023 about the qualifications. But I want everyone to understand as well, to the point you guys are talking about, there's also a prohibition on dual service. That they're saying that the person in that position shall not, while so serving, serve as the director of the CIA or as the head of any other element of the intelligence community. Why? They want the independent oversight to figure out that somebody is trustworthy in this position. But I also wonder about this idea of Congress being able to do something about it, because we have seen time and time again the concern of many American people who say, well, that break in case of emergency, nothing's in the glass. Nothing's behind it. And people look at this and say, okay, well, now what? You've said why, you know the reasons why, but how can they do something about it?
Well, look, I mean, I think Congress can do something today, right?
They can, but will they?
Well, that's the whole problem, right? I mean, if Congress is upset about the way the president is running the executive branch or the things he's doing, they have power too. It's not okay to simply say, okay, look, let's go after the president, right? He may be doing things wrong. He may put the wrong guy on the job, but Congress can do something about it tomorrow. They can fence the funds for ODNI tomorrow if they wanted to. They're not going to do that. They can take their authority back. In fact, if they do what Congressman Malinowski has suggested, which is to not reauthorize 702, that will not hurt ODNI. That's going to hurt America. Right? Yeah. Section 702 is the single most important surveillance authority we have, produces about 60% of the content of the president's daily brief. Right? Taking that away, not reauthorizing it, or doing what they did, these short-term reauthorizations, will be a massive error. That's not about Bill Pulte. That is not about anything but the American people's safety. If Congress doesn't do its job by June 12th, that's their fault, and they will fail.
One concern, I mean, if 60% for the daily briefing with the president is that, you have to wonder, given the president's stated priorities and even his statements recently that he wants him to look at everything and make a determination, including about releasing classified documents and the 2020 election. You wonder if that's going to be an inverted pyramid of things that are unrelated to national security, but instead elections, which is not the work of the DNI.
Priorities are completely upside down. I mean, we're talking about national security here, and he's talking about whether he was ripped off in the 2020 election, or whether there's a few leftover Biden-Obama people, which I assume are actually working for the country, unless they're doing otherwise. And we have a process for that. But the president should concern himself with previous appointees, and the whole thing's backwards. If you want to do reform, do serious reform. If it needs reform, we should do that. But don't put in a guy who has no experience doing reform, and then list off your personal enrichment agenda.
You know, acting can be a loose term in some ways, but there's enough damage that can be done even acting for a week. Jamil, thank you so much. Tom, Rick, please stand by. Next, we finally